So, with that, we can look at three different sources that people have suggested for where morality comes from. The first source is that values are determined, and by determined I mean they're part of the fabric of the universe itself. They're part of the created order. I alluded to this earlier. I'm going to break it down a little bit more now. Values are determined by nature. This is the primary view that's taken by our press today. For example, if you see people who are, interviewing, I don't know, there's a lot of the school shootings and things like that. The first thing that the press does is bring in not a priest, but either a psychologist or a neurologist who start talking about things like what? Brain chemistry. What kind of mental, health issues did this individual have? They start talking about biology. And ultimately, many people in our society hold that our values are determined by nature. That your biology, that the chemicals in your brain will behave in such a way you'll naturally be inclined not to want to murder, or you'll want to feel empathy. This is the way our brains are wired. And you hear this talk all the time, that our brains are wired to look at the cute faces of the little babies and be more protective of them and attractive of them, right? All this kind of stuff, that it's all merely the biology. That your belief or your state of understanding that this is right or wrong is a chemical reaction based on a past event, or maybe that you got reinforced. You saw something bad before and it released chemicals that were disagreeable to you, so your mind now comes up with new chemicals that are better when you do the opposite. And it's all just brain chemistry. It's all the fabric of the universe, that we can't help to generally feel empathy and compassion. We are evolved as a society, as a species, to do that. Yeah, anybody heard this stuff before? Yeah. Okay. The concept is like chemical dominoes, that basically this chemical reaction is a result of stimulation that you had right before it, and that stimulation was due to previous chemical reactions, either through your senses or through your mind, or both. And that situation was set up by the chemical reaction. And just like chemical dominoes, it starts falling one after another. Now, that explanation, I think, is wanting for several reasons. Number one, it isn't at all clear, for those who proffer this idea, Daniel Dennett and folks like that, who are desperately trying to get God out of the picture. It isn't at all clear that human beings actually will act in a civilized way once all the constraints are removed. And all we have to do is point to Ferguson, point to the LA riots in 1992, when the police are muzzled, when there is no consequence to one's actions, all of a sudden you have more and more people acting more and more viciously. So I'm not convinced, I'm not saying that everybody would do this, but I am saying it isn't at all clear to me that it's a fact that we naturally want to be altruistic. We naturally want to help one another. We naturally want to, I don't believe that to be true. The Bible says we have a sin nature. It actually argues the opposite. But I don't even have to go to the Bible from this. All I have to do is look around and say, what happens to people when you pull off all responses, all consequences for one's actions? But beyond that, if the way we behave is determined by chemical components of our brains, then how are we in any way free to make a choice for morality? Remember, that was one of the components we talked about, moral freedom. If the chemical dominoes are falling one after another, then we know what's going to happen next, but we can't be held responsible for it, can we? It's just the way my brain chemistry goes. Why would you lock me up? Why would you tell me what I did was wrong and I should have done something else when I couldn't have done something else because my brain chemistry is wired in such a way that my past events, future events, they're all locked together? Why punish the criminal? Why even distinguish between the criminally insane and the person who's culpable? How does that distinction make sense in a world where it's all just chemical dominoes falling one after another? Now, some evolutionists have pushed back on this. This is what we call a hard determinism, that you just have no choices whatsoever. The idea of free will is an illusory idea, that you're just dancing to your DNA, as Dawkins would put it. How will someone push back and say, that's not the way biology works. Your values aren't completely fixed. It's your biology plus your environment plus your past history. It's a lot of things. As a matter of fact, Mark D. Hauser has written, quote, "Nothing about an evolutionary or biological perspective leads inexorably to the notion of a determined, fixed, or immutable set of biology. And the biology of all species on Earth set up a range of possible behaviors. The range, we observe, interacts with the environments, and the environments change." So what Hauser is saying, it's not merely nature. It's nature and nurture. There's more than one thing going on here. Okay, but how do you choose your environment? Well, you really can't, can you? If nature places you with a mother and father, it's not like as a baby you could say, oh, they're going to not be good for me, I better go with someone else. No, you've been stuck what you are. And the nurture, the environmental factors around you all conspire together to shape your mind to do these choices. Ultimately, even if it's nature and nurture, it still comes back to being deterministic. It's just more than one factor in play. It's not merely the chemicals falling, it's the chemicals falling plus all this external stimulus. Do you see what I'm saying? So whether it's the mouse who runs to the, whatever they had, the cocaine-laced water bottle in a wide open field, or it's the mouse who runs to the cocaine-laced water bottle because he's in a tube, he's still going to the cocaine-laced water bottle. Whether it's nature and nurture or nature by itself doesn't matter. The end result is the same. There's no choice in the matter. The tube constricts him in which way he should go, but that environment gives him no better choice than the other. Okay, so some evolutionists have taken both of these, weighed them carefully, and said, well, actually, values are a fiction. There is no actual morality. Michael Roos is one of the philosophers who've held this, that if evolution is true, then morality doesn't really exist at all. He says, quote, "Morality simply does not work unless we believe it is objective. Darwinian theory shows that, in fact, morality is a function of subjective feelings. But it shows also that we have and must have the illusion of objectivity." So what Roos is saying is, yeah, we're dancing to our DNA. We think we're making choices. We think that there are moral absolutes that we must have, but that's just an illusion in order to help us survive. If evolution has created moral laws, then what they are is illusory. They're pretend. Okay? So it doesn't matter why we believe it or if we even the belief is true or not. What matters is that we believe it because it helps us survive. If morality, though, isn't real, then it can't be considered binding at all, can it? Then the sociopath is just as it's just as appropriate to go on a mass murder spree as it is to be Mother Teresa. It doesn't matter because there are no such thing as values. They're just illusory. If values are determined, we neither have freedom to choose or not choose our actions, and nor do we have the responsibility to do so. So in the idea that values are determined by nature, that's not a good moral system. It fails on all counts as far as I'm concerned. But what about this? What if values are invented? What if values are real, but they're real because we've looked around and we've seen things that make people better, and we've seen things that help us thrive, and we've chosen to focus on those things? What if values are something that we create ourselves? Well, the question then becomes, who gets to invent them? Who's the authority? Is it the individual? This is an idea called ethical egoism, where we're the ultimate determiner of what's right or wrong. Moral relativism falls into this camp. That might makes right, maybe. Right? Ethical egoism is not uncommon in most of the history of humanity. The guy with the biggest sword gets his way. Why? Why should I do that? Because I'm the king and I said so, and I'll have you beheaded if you don't. Ooh. If that is a true moral system, then what we would see is the ultimate moral good would be selfishness. It'd be my own upholding, right? If egoism is true, to be selfish would be the most appropriate. But that doesn't seem to sit right with us. We know morality doesn't work like, we know that altruism is better than selfishness. We know that being humble is better than being, a braggart. We know that just serving yourself is not something we should aim to be. So you hear all the shoulds and oughts and things like that in there. Well, maybe it's not the individual, maybe it's the society. Maybe it's everybody together agreeing that, murder is a bad thing. So we shouldn't murder. Let's all agree to do that. And if nobody murders, then hey, we all survive and the whole species thrives, gets better, right? Well, there's a big problem with that. That was the very concept that the Germans used when they were put on trial in Nuremberg after World War II. The SS officers would stand before the tribunal judges and say, hey, what we were doing was legal in our country. We were ordered, commanded by our commanding officer to do it, and you know that you, as a military man, must follow the orders of your officer. It wasn't illegal, so therefore the moral thing to do would be to follow the orders of the commanding officer. It was the law of the land. Shouldn't we obey the law? Isn't that the moral thing to do? And I believe it was Robert Johnson, who was a Supreme Court justice, came back and said, no, there is a law above man's law to which we all must adhere. Johnson said, society can't be the final step in whether something is right or not. Remember, I gave you the example previously. If Hitler had won, it still wouldn't make it right. Just because everybody agrees on something doesn't mean it's true. You can't get the ought from the is. There is a law above the law to which we must adhere. Invented values, and then here's the biggest problem. What happens first of all when these two things conflict? What happens when you have one society saying one thing and another society saying another thing and they're in opposition to one another? Who wins? Well, now we're back to might makes right, aren't we? It's a society with a bigger sword. Look at ISIS today. They want a certain political and religious system working in certain areas of the Middle East. And that's what they're fighting for. Now, other societies, other portions of Iraq and things like that said, no, that's not what we believe in. Now we're back to might makes right. Who's to say what's right? The guy with the biggest sword wins, if values are invented. If values are invented. For example, some things, when we do our duty, may not lead to our own personal happiness. It is March 9th. That means we have about 36 days to get our taxes done. I'm sorry to bring you down on this, but it is our duty, we are morally obligated to not cheat on our taxes, even if we don't like it. Okay? Doing our duty may not lead to our own personal happiness. In the extreme examples, it's the firemen running up the tower of 9/11 knowing that they're going to die, or the captain going down with his ship, or things of that nature. It may not lead to our personal happiness. It may not even lead to our corporate happiness, but it sometimes is the right thing to do. We see this played out in television all the time, right? You get the kind of what I call the Twilight Zone scenario, the alien race that's going to come in and dominate us, and the human beings are Independence Day, pick your movie, where they say, no, even if we have to die to the very last individual, we will fight being enslaved. Even if it kills all of us, because there is and this was the idea behind the Revolutionary War, by the way, guys. We've lost this today. The idea is, there's too many of our kids in body bags, let's stop. No, their idea was there was a value of liberty which trumped individual autonomy. That the concept of liberty for ourselves and our progeny was so important that individual lives may be lost, unfortunately, but it was worth it because the ideal, the moral standing of that value was higher than the lives of individuals. Not in every situation, don't get me wrong, there's ways to do this, and we have just war theory and things like that. But it's a key concept that there are ideas and values that are higher than saving one's life. If values are invented, that makes no sense. Why should I care if humanity ceases to be a couple thousand years from now because I'm not as nice as the next guy? I mean, why is this even binding on me? This is your other problem with values being invented. Well, if you're just inventing them, you guys go ahead, but I'm choosing to sit this one out, right? What do I care? I'll just live my life my way in peace, and I'll tell lies and cheat on people, what have you. Doesn't matter. I'll be happy, you'll be happy, and we'll go on. So, invented values are neither binding, nor should we feel any responsibility towards them if they conflict with our own preferences. This is the big problem with values being invented. So we know that values aren't determined by nature. We know they're not invented. That leaves us with one final choice. Values are discovered. They're discovered. They're discovered from within us. We have certain feelings, but they're also discovered through revelation. Values are understood in their basic concept by all people. And they, a lot of people try to say that there's this wide range of values in humanity, that different cultures believe in so many different things. It's actually not as big an issue as you think. Some people will throw the idea of, there's a couple of societies who had traditionally euthanized their parents at maybe 65 or 70. I can't remember the names of the tribes who would do that. And you say, oh, that's awful, Why would you do that? But when you talk to them, what you find is that they valued their parents. They honored them, and they honored them so much that they didn't want to see them degenerate into, something that may have been. Basically, it's a form of euthanasia that they considered death with dignity. Now, we don't hold that here, although we're getting closer. But the idea wasn't that they just killed off the old guys because they were taking up space. The idea was that there was still a value for their parents, even though if it was expressed differently. The value sits in distinction to the action of how that value is played out. Okay? One culture may have one man and one woman as the value system, as how the man and wife union is valued. Another culture may say a man can marry up to 4 wives. There is no culture where one man can take another man's wife. In every culture across history, that's always wrong. So we aren't as far off with each other as you would think. Values are understood in their basic concepts by all people. These values may be refined as we think about certain issues, like maybe the life and the wisdom of that individual. Maybe we honor them more by not killing them, by not just, knocking them out. Maybe it's a better sign of respect to dedicate ongoing years to taking care of them, as opposed to just either putting them in a nursing home or injecting them with some drugs when they become too big of a hassle. We have to think about these things and work through some of the specific instances of them, but there's an outside idea, concept of these values, and we need to discover what that is through reflection or through information provided by an outside source, as I said, such as the Bible. Now the question becomes, is the Bible a legitimate source for those values? And I would argue that it is. That's a separate topic, but that is a way that we can establish morality outside of inventing it or finding it in nature itself. Only discovered values offer an account of this moral freedom and moral obligation that I told you that we have, and genuine responsibility. We're responsible to God. So even if you live your entire life a lie, ultimately, God, who knows all truth, will hold you accountable. We have true moral freedom because we are created in the image of God, and God created us free in order to choose the good. We have that capability within us. And we know that God, as we read in John 14, that Jesus desires us to keep his commandments as a reflection of our love to him. Okay, so this is what moral values, this is where they come from. I can't see them being determined by nature, and I can't see them being invented. I see that they have to be discovered. They already exist apart and above humanity.